The year is 1998. Square Enix, is formerly known as Squaresoft, was in damn near the height of popularity in the 90s. Riding the absolute hype of Final Fantasy VII and 97, they were also in what they'll call the experimental period between all of their games with different combat mechanics, but pushing the overall horror of any game they dropped as time went on. Therefore, to be honest, it was the 90s and even early 2000s where most games that came out on PlayStation 1, PS2, GameCube, where every game left and right had many different experimental periods, many different phases. Shit, even sports games like football, we had games like Blitz League, or basketball, we had Streets Volume. Hell, we even had racing games that like Need for Speed and even Midnight Club, you know, House Real Big, Tim's Real Big, you know what I mean? Like, but back in the 90s and early 2000s, most games were made, therefore was super fun and wacky sometimes. This brings me to a very experimental time for Squaresoft, because one game in particular had hit the PlayStation 1 and it took the world by storm, and is also by far one of my favorite franchises, but also is one of the grandfathers of the survival horror genre, which is Resident Evil. Therefore, we seen brought to light is Parasite Eve, commonly known as Squaresoft's very own version of Resident Evil. Now, of course, seeing Squaresoft develop a horror game is a bit weird, you know, a little bit out of whack, since anybody and their mama knows that Squaresoft is known for RPG. They are the RPG gods. You know, they took over the 90s and early 2000s with a lot of their RPGs. But Squaresoft said, hold my beer, let's combine both genres. Therefore created an RPG survival horror game for the PlayStation 1. Now, during this retrospective, I would like to see how well does Parasite Eve hold up in 2024, and I also just want to relive the game's story and as well as the gameplay and try to remember from my childhood and, you know, go down this journey down memory lane with you guys. All of my gameplay that you'll be seeing here on screen will be done utilizing my PlayStation 1 emulator that is from RetroArch. What's up, Chaotic fam? It's your host, KSDTV here. And if you're new here, then this is your spot for it. This is your chill spot for all things RPGs news, reviews, guides. And today we're diving into the world of Parasite Eve, Square Enix's first horror RPG, and to see if it holds up today. So let's jump into the developmental time of Parasite Eve. To understand the development of Parasite Eve, we must understand the origins. There is a Japanese novel with the same name, Parasite Eve, which acts as a prequel to what we see in the game that was released in 1995. A plot point in the novel focuses on what happened to Aya's mother, whom in the game we know has passed away along with her sister Maya. But basically, Eve had chosen Mariko Anzai, whom is Aya's biological mother, to be the host for Eve, which this will actually end up explaining a future plot point in the video game about how Eve attacked Japan. The development of Parasite Eve 2 was 2 years long and was produced by the absolute GOAT himself, Hironobu Sakaguchi, the individual who created the Final Fantasy series with help from his director, Takashi Takeda, the lead designer for Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy, Live Alive, and now Parasite Eve. The game engine that was used was a modified version, which is the same as Final Fantasy VII, but just a tad bit more improved in a sense. It does make sense, though, that Final Fantasy would be utilized for that engine, since just a year prior, in 1997, Final Fantasy VII was released. So they basically was like, you know what, let's make our lives a tad bit easier. Let's utilize the same engine, in which that is, you know, is something that is not unheard of. A lot of devs use similar engines. Shit, Sega with the Yakuza series is definitely one of those. But during the initial development period, there were talks to attempt to continue the sequel to the novel and to keep the setting in Japan, but Sakaguchi was creating the outline for the story for the game, and it went as far as to write the story with little to no references from watching any movies, but he just only had the base reference from the novel. Therefore, he wanted the game to be set in New York City. Hideaki Sina, the author of the original Parasite Eve novel, was not known of the plot for the video game until it was already finished due to a collaboration of Square and Sina's publisher. The game development team consisted of both American and as well as Japanese workers, which, if I'm not mistaken, is a first for the Square team, having help with CG work and giving different concepts such as the beginning opera scene, and even helping with the designs of Aya and as well as Melissa transforming into Eve. Aya Brea was also created by Hidenobu Sakaguchi and designed by another legend in the RPG world, the designer Tetsuya Nobara, known for his work in The Bouncer, Worlds Ends With You, and also some of the Final Fantasy games. Now, Aya was originally being designed by somebody else, but the original sketches did not overly satisfy Sakaguchi, who had wanted a long-haired character like Aerith from Final Fantasy VII, someone who, of course, at the time is a very central character. He was creating another unspecified character for a different project who also had very similar short hair. He ended up getting confused while designing them and accidentally combined the two designs. Actually, by doing that, created the Aya that we know now. But basically, her original concept was to be shown as strong, sexy, and bewitching that a lot of the reporters noted. Now, one thing that I can probably have an idea of why Aya's original character design was going to be that way was essentially mainly because, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of the female leads have some form of sexiness to them. For an example, let's think about Final Fantasy VII. We have somebody like Tifa. There's some form of a sex appeal with her design. There's Lara Croft, someone else, we all had our crushes, our video game crushes when we were growing up. Yeah, Lara Croft was another one on the PlayStation 1. Her design, some of the scenes in those games, especially like the bath scene. So I think that was the original idea, but it ended up getting mixed up, and we ended up getting Aya now, someone who's a little bit more modest, not really too out there, But after all of this, a video demo of Parasite Eve was shown back in 1997's Tokyo Game Show, mainly showcasing a full motion video with no gameplay, showcasing that, hey, we have a new project on the way, and I really hope everybody likes it. And that was mainly the idea. Like I said, this is the late 90s, early 2000s, where almost every game was being experimented on. And at the point of release, Parasite Eve was shown to be the first game in Square's history to have a M rating on the ESRB. Now, Parasite Eve released March 29th, 1998, for a sale price at the time period of $50. And of course, that varied per retailer, as it always does per games back then, and even nowadays, like depending on where you buy it from, it may not be at the MSRP, but at that time, $50. And shit, I can only imagine in today's inflation that this game probably cost a lot of money. It would definitely cost a lot of money. Another ended up mix up, and this always happens with a lot of big releases, that there was also a shipping mix up that 200 copies was also sent to Best Buy a week prior to release. So it was a hectic time period for a lot of retailers out there for this game. This game opened up to great, critically acclaimed reviews. Everybody loved it. I think it received a bunch of 7 out of 10s across the board. And it was just a nice little fun project that Squaresoft was looking to make. With the development period out of the way, let's pop the disc into my emulator. Let's boot up Parasite Eve. And through the Handy Daily emulator, let's see the journey of Parasite Eve. I want to talk about the story and the gameplay. Now, the way that I want to structure the retrospective is going over the entire story. So if you have not beat the game, I suggest coming back to this video later. This is the only spoiler warning that I'm going to have. But I will be talking about the gameplay that happens alongside the story. So Parasite Eve opens up to a beautiful CG video showcasing New York City and the Statue of Liberty with the different moments that happens throughout the game, really showing that beautiful CG work and we all know and love during the PS1 lifespan. We hit the start screen with Parasite Eve having a very similar start screen like Resident Evil, bringing a sense of familiarity. Now, one thing to know is that the game does not have a traditional tutorial like in most games seen in the more recent years. If you want to learn all about the game's mechanics and how it works, you will need to scroll through the tutorial and read exactly how the game works. This was very common back in the day due to the fact of a lot of games either you relied on guides, like actual thick ass pages, thick ass books of guides of teaching players about the game, or the little game guide that was found inside of the overall jewel case. So but devs thought, maybe this stuff may end up getting lost, so they just left a little tutorial. Now, of course, over time tutorials started being built into the opening segments. So one thing to note is that because Parasite Eve was made on the PlayStation 1, this game utilizes also the D-pad to move around, meaning we need to understand tank controls. Now, tank controls is very well known in games like Silent Hill and as well as Resident Evil. Essentially, Aya is able to move forward, and she can move back, and right and left can strafe her as well. When it comes to combat, hence why I said earlier in this video that Parasite Eve is an RPG first and it's a horror game second. That is one thing to note throughout this entire, before we even get any further into this game, that RPG first, horror game second. Once you understand and you break that down, it makes this entire game, a lot easier to swallow. There is real-time combat with a bit of turn-based functionality. Aya is freely able to move around, which makes positioning her very key to winning any battle. When it's time to fight, Aya uses weapons like handguns, grenade launchers, and many more weapons. There's a plethora out there. And how battles work is through the active time bar, which is the blue meter above your health. And Aya, and as well as the enemies, has this gauge which helps the flow of combat. And over the years, you will see other RPGs have better variations of this exact system. But once that bar fills up for Aya, she's allowed to do a couple of actions. And one of those actions is, of course, blasting all your enemies right in the face. And when it's time to enter that combat, you will have a range dome appear around you. Now, for anyone who is familiar with Vagrant Story, another PS1 classic, it has a very similar mechanic, which anyone in the ring you can deal damage to. But if they are out of the ring, there's a chance you will miss your shots. So positioning is highly key to win most fights. One trick that I learned which saved my ass on many fights is strafing the sides of the enemies. Another function Aya can do per active bar is using her mitochondria powers, or known as parasite energy, or PE for short. You can even swap your weapons through each turn, but know it will use up that turn if you choose to do so. So the story begins with Aya pulling up to an opera house with some man who seems to be her date for the show. As Aya is watching the show, she begins to watch the play, and we begin to notice our very first important person, which is the woman in the red dress. A CG movie begins to play, and we see Melissa, that woman in the red dress, locking eyes with Eve, and the whole crowd begins to burst into flames. And my honest, for God's sake, opinion, soon as I saw the first body blow up, bro, I would have left in a heartbeat. Like, all you would have saw was a shadow fly right past you, because I would have skedaddled, hit the burners on them, bro, if I saw some shit like that popping off, bro. A lot of those people in there was like sitting down, gasping, like, oh my God, oh my God. No, bro, run, dog. There's no stick around and like, no, we'll cry about it later. We need to get the hell out of here. So as Melissa begins to transform, Aya gives chase and ends up confronting her on stage. We get our first combat encounter and the first round with Eve, and goddamn, this is gonna be many rounds. I hated it. I had few choice words with her throughout this entire game. But the fight is very simple. As you learn and understand how combat works in the game, you will deal enough damage that the actress tells us that she is Eve, and that the mitochondria is supposed to evolve and take over our bodies. And after giving chase to Eve, we go further to the opera house, and we end up seeing a vision of a little blonde girl that seems to be very familiar to Aya. This one thing about this game's entire plot point is that the mitochondria is overall it's funny because it's the biggest meme for anybody who is in school. Just like the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Well, goddamn, the devs and publishers and the writer, the author, they took that and ran with it with this entire plot for this game. It's like mitochondria this, your mitochondria is overpowering, you can do this. It's just gets crazier and crazier, and I'm just like, bro, they really took that and ran with it. But we actually get to do a little bit of exploration bit, by going room to room, and we come across a mutation of a rat, showing the player how the mitochondria is really being that powerhouse of the cell and is currently attacking the cells inside of the rat and transforming him into this grotesque looking tailed beast. I don't know. They look ugly. We end up defeating the rat and continue to chase Eve. We actually end up seeing red bodies. Now, this is a little bit where the game does this storytelling for the world building. Due to all the bodies burning up earlier in the show, you see that a lot of other people started overall burning up as well as Eve passed them. So basically, being anywhere near Eve can cause your body to, I guess, overheat due to the mitochondria. Basically, the civilians who didn't survive the initial attack, who did survive the initial attack, has now been burnt to a crisp. And in one room, we come across a phone, and guess what? This is their way of saving the game. Now, one thing that definitely separates this game from Resident Evil is the unlimited amount of saves and not relying on a limited supply like the ink ribbons in Resident Evil. But checking our rooms, we finally find the diary of what seems to be Melissa's diary, as she jotted down her thoughts leading up to getting the lead part for the show. And at the end of the diary, we end up getting a key to open the door to fight Eve for the second time. Round 2, baby. I've been running around them hands with this woman. You know how long I've been waiting for this? I'm about to make a name for myself here. But one thing to know during this boss fight, oh man, Melissa just lost all control. She transforms into our big bad, and we now go up against the fully transformed Eve. And this fight was a pain in the ass, as most bosses do like to have their widespread attacks in a room where, I don't know, the character does not have enough room to maneuver. Yeah, I died quite a few times to this boss fight when I shouldn't have. So just know when you die, and this is one thing I hated about older games, when you die, guess what, bro? You're going back to the lobby. This is worse than any battle royale that you have played. Battle royale, you're back to the lobby, you're back in it. Nah, bro, this one hit a little different, because watching myself die, see the start screen, hit continue, and I have to go all the way back to my last save. God. But after reloading my last save and beating Eve again, we give chase into the sewer system below the opera house. Now, during this segment, it's nothing but straight hands, and you start to see a tiny bit of the formula that the game is going to offer throughout, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So during this time, you get really accustomed to the combat. One environmental thing I also want to take note is that all the enemies you fight in each of the missions is almost quite native to the area that you're in. So during this time in the sewers, we are fighting against frogs. We fight against like big ass New York City rats. They're basically built like a cat, like a tiger, bro. They're all absolutely cooked. Towards the end of the sewer, we find Eve, and she sends a gator towards us. And dog, I also hated this fight as well. This fight took me some time, but once I got the hang of it, the boss fight that it teaches you right off the back that you really need to strafe your enemies. You need to do that 24/7 throughout the rest of this game. That makes this game 10 times easier to actually get on. If you strafe your enemies, you stick to their sides, you deal your damage, you heal if you need to, and it's rinse and repeat, because this motherfucker will come charging at you, dealing like stupid damage, and it's you. And I died quite a few times to them, but once I got the idea of like I probably should be strafing his sides, and then it realized that the enemy AI strafing is like their weakness, and I feel like, I don't know if that was on purpose or that's just an exploit. We don't know. But after the fight, you leave the opera house, and it is immediately being bombarded by news reporters. And the person to save the day enters our main character number 2, Danielle, which is the overall GOAT of the game, Aya's best friend, co-worker in the police force, to knock the absolute shit. Like, he rocked the reporter right on his ass, and he takes Aya home. This ends up completing the very first day. This game does have chapters, but it's built in a day cycle that gives you up to 6 days in total. Each day basically progresses the plot for the first half of the day, and the second half of the day is where you get your exploration, your combat, the little bit light puzzle solving with the bit of backtracking as well, really showing that formula of that RPG with the survival horror. Once day 2 begins, we get to explore the police department, which is our base of operations. In this moment, you can fully explore the station, but before continuing the main story, I take my time to gander at what the station has to offer. I ended up going to the basement, and I come across 2 cops, Wayne and Taurus. They give off energy as they are teacher and student, as Wayne seemed to want to craft very all-powerful weapons, but Taurus is very against it, due to an event that happened, which I'll explain a little bit later in the video. These 2 act as a upgrade for your weapons and to store your equipment as well as your items. Which brings me to the tool feature. Throughout the game, you will pick up items called tools. They are able to upgrade armor and her weapons by either improving the parameters of your current gear by sacrificing another weapon, while each weapon has 3 different things, which are the attack damage, the range, and the bullets that you can improve. Some weapons also get special passive abilities like acid rounds, item increase, heal yourself when your health reach to a particular point in the health bar. So seeing what weapon works for you is ideal, because you will lose the weapon if you use it to upgrade a weapon. Each weapon, I also notice, has a hidden mechanic, which if you are using a handgun, you will notice the AT gauge running faster. But if you use a grenade launcher or a shotgun like a heavy weapon, I also notice that the AT gauge moves a bit slower, making you have to run around dodging enemy attacks, bringing more of a high risk, high reward due to the fact I get to use powerful weapons. But if my weaving game is on point, then I can capitalize on maximizing the most damage as possible. After talking with the 2 cops, we can further investigate the police department, and when we're done, we can talk to the chief to pick up a lead on Eve. Now, in this process of that, we see Ben, whom is Daniel's son, and we learn a bit about their family dynamic, which kind of plays plays a lot throughout the story. Daniel shares custody with his son, but can barely see him since he is a cop and always quite busy. Now it is time to face the press as we explain what happened. And dog, why did Aya? Bro, she did not need to scare the audience by explaining what actually happened after the chief just told her, whatever you do, do not speak. I understand why Aya spoke, but God, you cause PR problems by doing that, because Chief Baker does have a point. He does have a point. No one's going to believe that random people just started bursting into flames and this weird, crazy monster is transformed and is causing people's mitochondria to start exploding. Like, bro, no one's gonna believe that. So why the hell are we trying to explain to the press what's actually going on when we know damn well they ain't gonna believe it? So after we clean up the mess after the PR fiasco, Daniel explains that they know that a researcher in a museum nearby has some info that he's been studying on the mitochondria. So now let me explain what exactly, like I said, it goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Parasite Eve is one big science project. For anyone who paid attention to school will know that, like I said, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And when the game centers around that exact fact, that the mitochondria is being overdrived and causing the cells to start to raise up in heat and throw you out of whack and cause people to burn. Apparently, this specific researcher has been studying a similar phenomenon that has already happened. So now we need to go to the museum, which brings us up to the overworld map. And you can actually pick between places of interest. And so much of this game is literally why I wish we can get a remake of this game. Dr. Klemp is the researcher we are looking for, and he's an individual who is a prime person to talk to since he's the one who's been researching the incident. But by visiting the museum, we find Dr. Klemp and we begin to question him, and Aya starts to have visions of a man who is similar to Klemp. And this blonde little girl. Keep in mind, you will also see a lot of visions pertaining to that hospital bed and that little girl, but we'll put a pin in that for later. This is also the same blonde little girl that we saw in day one during the Opera House exploration side of things, foreshadowing that Aya is also connected to this entire mess. Klemp is super suspicious during this talk, and he was even speaking about the mitochondria like he is superior, really hinting that he knows more than he is telling us. But Aya gets fed up with the conversation and we decide to head back to the police department, and Chief Baker lets us know that Melissa is holding another concert in Central Park, which is awfully weird because we kind of just watched her crash out essentially in the Opera House. So we also find out that Daniel's ex-wife and his kid Ben is going to be there, so we need to get to Central Park now. So this sets up now the overall combat and exploration portion of day 2. We end up arriving at Central Park, and we know Eve is definitely here due to Daniel not being able to enter because he basically walked through the front gate and also caught a bit on fire. So Aya tells him that we should be able to go instead so we can save his family and we can confront Eve as well. And like I was saying earlier, that about that formulaic parts of this game, this really starts to show in day 2 that there is a formula that is going on. In the beginning of the day, we actually progress the story, and towards nighttime, we get the RPG side of things with combat, exploration, puzzles, and you will notice that each day moving forward, and Central Park is a zoo, so for the enemies we fight are all zoo animals like snakes, poisonous snakes, and goddamn, they got on my last nerves. I died way too much to those poisonous snakes in the very beginning, but once you level up enough, we actually get to utilize bonus points, which basically brings me to the next segment that we need to cover. Bonus points is essentially a upgrade system. Every time you gain 100 points by leveling up, you can increase one or two things. You can increase your AT gauge by basically speeding up the time that it takes for you to have your turn, or increase your item capacity, just opening up more stuff that Aya can carry while she's out and about without needing to store items in the police department. So while fighting for my life in the zoo, we pick up new weapons and we further the plot. I do actually love the storytelling bits of Central Park. The broken glass in the rainforest section shows why we have snakes and other animals attacking us, really showing Eve can transform anything that she likes due to the mitochondria found in everything. There's also a lot of emotional bits in this day, especially of how Daniel acts about his family. Like, I felt that raw emotion, but everything is in text and there's no voice acting. So I can feel the emotion, especially bits with Daniel and his son, but the delivery can be much, much better if we had some strong voice acting. Which brings me to talk about the sound design of this game. The soundtrack is fucking amazing, man. Anytime I enter the battles, the OST just kicks in, makes me hype. I start headbanging just a little bit, especially some of the boss fights. Like, I just be so locked in. The person who gave us this banger is Yoko Shimamura, and I need all, and I repeat, I need all of my Kingdom Hearts fans to stand up, because this woman composed music for Kingdom Hearts, Super Mario RPG, Street Fighter 2, Final Fight, and so many more games we all know and love. This woman is the GOAT. She's the GOAT. She's the GOAT. We had a GOAT roster for the designer, the story writer, and the composer. This was a GOAT roster, and we're talking about experimental time for Square Enix, bro. GOATs, absolute GOATs. But without me glazing the crew here, the scene cuts to a CG motion video as we see Eve killing the audience and turning them into a blob-like monster. And as we give chase, Ben ends up living through it and he ends up running away, but his mom gets caught up into the blob, and right after that, there is a worm boss fight that does have multiple phases. This boss acts like a Hydra in a sense, not much of growing body parts back, but the more worms you beat, the fatter they get, to create one large earthworm. And after this fight, we finally caught up to Eve, and yes, she is back, and you fight her again on a carriage in Central Park as she caught the horse on fire, and he starts hitting the burners, and it sets us up for our very next boss fight. Her boss fight is quite simple. You practically just shoot her till you get the cutscene. This does not feel like much like a boss fight, since it's theoretically just there to just further the plot along, but they just wanted to give us something to do while to explain the next set of events that are going to happen, because after the Central Park boss fight, the carriage ends up crashing and it knocks Aya unconscious, and due to how big the Eve threat has gotten, the city is now evacuating from New York City. Like, everybody's leaving. You've seen everybody in their cars leaving it on the bridge. It's bad. And the attack on the zoo was like the final straw, which then we have another major plot point, which is the scene goes to the police station and Ben is saved and he chills with Shiva, the dog. And damn, this is about to get sad fast, because the dog ends up turning just a little bit. But the scene cuts to a couple of cops helping people evacuate, and we soon meet a Japanese man named Maeda, who meets cops, which one cop has a slight bit of racism towards him. He finds Aya and explains to Danielle and Aya that a similar incident to Japan happened, which this is one of the references from the novel Parasite Eve, which to us the player know this is Aya's mother he is mentioning, but right now it is still all a mystery and just another clue to the mitochondria incident. Maeda was able to slip past the cops, and because one of them actually caught flames and he sees a crashed carriage, takes Aya into safety, and that will end day 2 and begin our day 3. So the next morning, Aya is still feeling she may be a monster, thinking she could hurt Maeda and Daniel, but you visit a gun shop, therefore to gear up for the absolute bullshit that is about to hit you soon enough. We were able to explore the gun shop and a nearby pharmacy to get supplies and new weapons, but we'll head out to the museum to allow Maeda to be able to do his own research other than just clamp, and he ends up figuring out that Aya's cells in her body can reject Eve's mitochondria hacks, hence why she's only person that can withstand Eve and be our only defense against her. The plot of the story really ties into the gameplay and makes sense, which allows the player to immerse themselves into Aya, and we believe we are truly the last defense of mankind. During these tests, Dr. Clem ends up coming back to his office and a confrontation begins, but while we are dealing the maniac, Doctor, who is being even more suspicious once he finds out Aya's cells is fighting off Eve's cells, Daniel ends up taking quite a peek at Clemp's PC, and he sees his family, both Ben and his ex-wife Lorraine, names are now listed on a kidney transplant list, which truly raises concern for the entire party. With all the stress and tension, leaving out of the room, Clemp tells them all to leave, so we end up heading back to the police department to find that it's been attacked by Eve. This story bit was quite interesting, and it's truly showing true colors of Clemp, and he's really hiding something far worse than what we can imagine. Even though the game has no form of truly showcasing that emotion, they did do a good job on the writing for this game, and just the way this game is paced is pretty good, to the point I was so locked into the overall story. The police department has been attacked and damn near everyone is dead. And our lovable duo has been attacked and damn it, they got our boy Taurus. Wayne, his pain that he was suffering, I felt that. Like watching Taurus just pass away definitely hit deep, especially if you visit him enough during your last trip in the police department. I love the banter between the two, but we do end up finding out that Taurus was against using weapons is because his daughter was accidentally shot by a weapon. And now Taurus blamed guns and decided to not shoot the raging dog that was coming his way. And did I mention that also the police department is under attack and Ben has gone missing chasing after Shiva, that dog that we saw from the earlier cutscene when he was hanging out with her. Yeah, it ain't looking too good for our boy. But Taurus's daughter, though, her dying makes a lot of sense actually as to why when you visit Taurus in the past, he would make a lot of remarks about how dangerous guns are. His quite famous quote, anytime you leave him, he will always say, cops own guns for protection. Don't let the gun own you. I think this is a way of Taurus trying to grieve with the fact his daughter passed away due to a weapon. That event got him off the field. It had made him damn near quit the force. He wanted to work only in the weapons department to make sure what happened to his daughter does not happen again. We also noticed that Wayne, one of our other police buddies, was slightly injured during the fight against the outbreak, and he actually ends up living through it past that point. Now, after going through the police department, we follow Ben up to the top of the department, and my God, Shiva fully transforms in front of Ben and the chief, and they actually try to fend off the beast as we make it just in time. Enter the shittiest boss in this whole game. Actually, fuck this boss. Fighting Shiva is an absolute pain in the ass. She's too goddamn big for the small ass arena, and I get stuck on different shit in the room, and she does too much damage. And lead up to the boss fight, I'm just getting jumped by all types of enemies that lead up to the boss fight and using up all of your shit beforehand. It was absolutely agonizing. But once I finally got past all that, I promise you, I have saw the menu screen more times than I can count. Last note about this boss, fuck this boss. We saved Ben and the chief, but with the chief out of commission, Daniel is now the new chief in standing. Therefore, we begin day 4. So after that bullshit boss fight, we finally learned that Eve only attacked the precinct as a distraction to go to the hospital for a sperm bank. Now, her plan is to essentially take a sperm sample to allow herself to become pregnant, and if that happens, she will birth the ultimate being. Therefore, if that happens, we are absolutely cooked. So that's our next stop. Now, of course, the entire plot of this game is definitely something interesting, to say the least. It's a lot of things that are very confusing, but is also very intriguing at the exact same time, and it essentially just locks you in. So the party ends up splitting up, and Aya and Maeda goes to the hospital, and when they make it, Eve detects Aya right away and sends all types of goons our way, and as well as locking us into the hospital. Now, in this time frame, we need to find fuses to get the power back on, so we get to more exploration of the hospital, and you begin to see much more harder monsters. Now, there are these blue globs that honestly, and bro, please don't kill me in the comments section, but why do the blue blobs look like Chaos from Sonic Adventures? They just had a striking resemblance, and I was like, why you look kind of oddly familiar? But now I do want to take the time and actually talk about some of the technical issues that I experienced during my time as soon as I got to day 4. Battles started taking really long, these long pauses before I entered the battles. With this game having random encounters in it, it makes fights last a lot longer, way longer than it need to. Now, I won't fault it too much since I was playing this on an emulator from RetroArch, which it could just be some form of an error for the emulator's part. But while exploring the a hospital, we kill a giant chaos looking blob. Yes, I'm calling them chaos from now on. And we find out from a doctor that we need to get to the 13th floor to get the nitrogen that allows us to stop Eve from grabbing the sperm samples. But come to find out, we are already too late since the sperm lab has been overly destroyed. And we find out through, scavenging throughout the sperm lab that Dr. Clamp was working on these sperm samples. While also checking out the room, we also find out that this room has a very similar list of patients that were found in Clamp's PC back in the museum in day 3. We also learn more about Aya's sister and the mom car accident, which keeps tying Aya to being part of this triangle with Aya, Eve, and Aya's mother. We continue going upstairs and we get a cutscene showing the army is now getting involved with the Eve threat. But after seeing the army get involved, we head to the rooftop. Therefore, we end up finding a giant brain bug. This ugly ass motherfucker, bro. This man just looked hit. This boss essentially has 2 phases and also has an annoying fireball attack as well as webs that trap you. Now, one thing about these webs, they're a little bit more of an improved variation of the webs because if you get stuck in these webs, you cannot move at all. Unlike the other spider enemies that we encountered in the past, where it just essentially just slows down your movement. No, you are stuck in exactly this moment. Which brings me to the status ailments that are in this game, which can be countered through potions that fit the ailment or utilizing Aya's parasite energy to cleanse or heal yourself as well. As you get on further and further out the days, you would definitely need to abuse her powers a lot during these boss fights. Now, they are more of an endurance DPS check, but after you defeat it, you will come across Eve. Once you come across her, she explains her plan, hinting that she may be connected to Aya's mother. Due to Eve's powers, the soldiers and the fighter jets explode and we must escape the rooftop due to the crashing plane coming to us on the rooftop. Therefore, once we escape, we head back to the precinct with Maeda and Danielle, but that concludes day 4. Day 4 was overall a very short chapter. There's not too much that really goes on in this day other than just visiting the hospital. But since most of it was literally just fighting in the hospital and I was able to just breeze past most of the enemies on my way to the top, since at this point, the amount of gear that I obtained from, the previous days was able to allow me to just get through it. It was just mainly a lot of fighting. But the day that actually has the most time frame in it will be day 5, and that sets us up for the next day. So day 5 unlocks 2 brand new locations that opens up, and it's the warehouse and Chinatown. Now, the warehouse is an optional area, but I had wanted to do Chinatown first, and God, the scenery looks great. We end up catching up with Maeda and he gives us another charm. Now, there is one thing to take note with these charms, that Maeda seems to be catching some form of feelings for Aya and always wants her to be safe. So whenever we go on a dangerous mission, he gives you a good luck charm to make sure that Aya is safe. And it's kind of one of those things, like it's a small telltale signs that this random stranger cares a lot about Aya. Essentially, he doesn't know her from Timbuktu, but he wants her to be as much as safe. Now, of course, you can say like, oh, well, he's just being friendly, anything like that. But nah, there's a little bit more. Now, of course, I do wish like these games kind of fleshed out a little bit more of the story. This is why I always say this game could definitely use a remake, because there's certain story bits into this game that could be really fleshed out if they had the time to. You got to think, back in this time period, back in 1998, a lot of games back then came out on multiple discs, and all these games are so massive that it filled the disc size to a certain point where they needed to utilize multiple discs just to put it. So with technology that is advanced as nowadays, they can definitely do a remake and kind of just redo a little bit of story or add more to the story. So after the good luck charm is given to Aya, we enter the sewers of Chinatown, and this entire location is essentially one big ass maze, and it looks also pretty gross. The monsters here are big ass bats that inflict darkness, which limits your vision during your attacks. You can notice that when you go to attack, that the dome that you normally have is now shrunken, and it's going to be smaller than Aya herself, meaning if you attempt to attack, you can only really attack and it's going to have a very high chance of missing. This is why in this part you need to be utilizing the Cure D potion, which basically relieves yourself of the darkness infliction. Throughout the sewers, we end up getting to the heart of the sewers, and we see the blob all the way back from the central park trying to infect the water supply, which is absolutely horrible, so we must stop it by using the water pressure to force him out, and we get to the final boss of day 5, disc 1. Yes, you heard me right. Day 5, disc 1. Now, of course, day 5 takes part in both discs, so you must need both discs to finish disc 5. But heading to the subway, and I love the change up of the music for this section of the game. And towards the end, we end up with the centipede boss, which is the final boss of part 1 of day 5. The boss has 2 phases, which is phase 1, him as a whole centipede that casts a bunch of poison attacks and lightning attacks, and utilizing the detox power with Aya can definitely help in this situation. His second phase is the centipede, but he's now in 4 parts that all move very fast and very quick and do different attacks. So after focusing on each part, we finally beat him, but after finally beating it, we get the gate key. So therefore, we can head to the museum, and at this point, we need to swap discs and finish the game on the second disc. Now, trying to swap the disc in the emulator was quite difficult. It took me almost a couple of hours just to figure it out, but I ended up figuring it out, and let's begin day 5, part 2. So now that we have the gate key, we can actually finally escape the subway system, and I decided to hit up the warehouse as well. But when we headed to the warehouse to continue looking for Eve, we actually meet up with a cop who is actually scared of the warehouse, and he leaves and we go investigate. Granted, I will say that the cop was being an absolute bitch about it and damn near left the dog, but he ended up coming back. Therefore, after investigating the warehouse, you end up finding a crab. Now, that warehouse level, there's nothing really crazy that happens in this given level. It is essentially just an optional area that allows you to gain new items and new gear. There is one funny scene where there's 2 rats chasing each other and they both transform, and then the one rat scares off the other rat. It reminds me of like Tom and Jerry in a sense, but there's nothing of value in this map other than just getting like free experience points, a couple weapons, and a couple items. But let's talk a little bit about the crab boss itself. After finding the centipede, the crab boss was actually a walk in a park for me. The crab boss has 2 arms you must get rid of first before attacking the main body. He casts a bubble attack, which is a widespread attack, and all I did was hug his side, blast him, and his eye can shoot laser beams, so dodging those will make this fight easy. With the optional area out of the way and grabbing all the items and gear I could find, we finally head to the museum to continue day 5's story. And upon entering, we notice a man in a white coat, and it looks like Dr. Clamp, so we give chase. Now it's time to explore the museum, and finally, and one of the first areas we come across is the rainforest, which has some light puzzles asking questions about the mitochondria and many of their questions. And we also notice a giant scorpion is blocking our way. Therefore, he's our next boss. I see him more like a mini boss since there are other scorpions you'll find that has a similar attack pattern, but this one is just bigger. Too damn big at that. Further into the museum, we see that Eve can touch anything, whether it's dead or alive, because she was able to regenerate dinosaurs from the museum and have them attack us. We even have to defend ourselves from armadillos and dinos that Eve can even send a whole ass, big ass pterodactyl our way. Like, dog, this was not on my bingo card to be fighting dinos in a non-Dino Crisis game. You know, like they really, Squaresoft really threw everything out of the bunch for this game. But we fight through the museum till we get to the security room, and we notice Eve is now pregnant, which is not good at all. That means the ultimate being is close to being born, but we also see how Eve is resurrecting dinos due to the massive slime that we saw back at Central Park and subway system. Therefore, the slime has now made its way all the way to the museum to infect the giant T-Rex. So after we head to Clamp's lab, and this is where Maeda has been, but he wanted to test something, therefore Daniel went to look for something in the hospital, and he should be back on his way back here. Maeda will give you a special gun that requires special bullets to allow Aya to be able to fight Eve, but apparently it's supposed to just help us against Eve, but that theoretically won't be useful until we get to the final battle that's currently in day 6. Maeda found a blood serum with Maya's name on it. This girl is Aya's sister, a other individual who also passed away with Aya's mother, which also points signs to a connection between all of them. The research code for it was called Eve, which basically utilized liver cells from them. But after Maeda explains that Dr. Clamp has been doing this for years, speak of the devil, Dr. Clamp himself will enter the room. This man throughout the entire game has been really just showing that he's guilty at this point and becomes overly outraged towards the group. But before he can do anything to harm Aya, Daniel will come from behind and take him down. After Dr. Clamp regains his consciousness, he will tell us his master plan. So far, his plan is working well. Eve is successfully pregnant without any interference from the male mitochondria DNA. I will say this master plan follows all the way back from Japan, like I said, which is the overall prequel to this game. And at this point of explaining everything, he is done, but Eve will end up setting Dr. Clamp on fire while Maeda and Danielle escape through the window. You'll eventually obtain Clamp's key, which allows us to unlock many areas of the museum that we could not do before. As we further progress through the museum, we end up getting 2 particular boss fights that ends up being back to back, which is a Triceratops, and remember that T-Rex being engulfed by that slime? Well, he's back and he wants hands. So let's start off with the Triceratops, which is simple. He charges and casts lightning. Take down his head. When it falls off, you can destroy the meat and he's cooked. This Triceratops knock us out the window to begin the T-Rex fight. But dude, this fight is way too easy. He can cast fire and that's about it. Once we mop the floor with the big old dino, we notice that Eve's pregnancy is now going even further and is accelerating faster than it should be. And she lets us know that she will release slimes from the sewers upon the city. And not even seconds later, guess what? Those slimes will now merge to form a gigantic slime monster. It decides to destroy everything in its path while heading to the museum. And as we're watching the CG motion movie, its hand will burst into the 4th floor, and then the hand opens up and practically grabs Eve. And then they leave. This is super bad because now we have a couple of issues. We have a highly pregnant Eve. We have a slime monster that is protecting her. And the situation is just getting worse for the shit as time goes on. So we must leave the museum and we send Danielle and Maeda are waiting outside. Maeda will let us know what drugs Melissa was on, which Melissa was that same girl in the red dress from the very beginning of the game, and she was on immunosuppressants. I guess when we read that diary from her a while ago, she was taking a lot of medicine, and I guess she ended up not taking one of the medicines, and it actually ended up accelerating the mitochondria to allow Eve to fully take over her body. We end up hearing the full story on how Aya's mother and sister and the transplants between them has somehow created Eve to take over Melissa's body. From the original attack on Japan has failed, this is Eve's last hope by using Maya's kidney cells to form the ultimate being, which this sets up the final day. Now, moving on to day 6, a whole CG movie plays out and we get to watch Aya destroy the slime that is attacking the Statue of Liberty. With all of the other forces, once they attempt to fly towards it to buy Aya sometimes, Aya ends up watching the crew die one by one through these soldiers, and it's just sad. And Aya ends up dealing the final blow to the slime with the rockets from it. Once this movie is over and the slime is dealt with, we finally get our hands on Eve for the 3rd time, and by God, we run in that round 3, baby. Her boss fight is simple. We fight her to the remains of the destroyed Statue of Liberty. I honestly used probably the most overpowered power that Aya has, which is her liberation, to deal dumbass amounts of damage, while taking her down body part by body part till you hit the 2nd phase. And liberation again does the trick with a few shells, just for added leverage. Just when we think it's over, we must kill the baby that's born from Eve, and by God, this boss fight is definitely an endurance check. It has multiple forms, the baby is ugly as hell, and the boss fight is dumb hard. Towards the last end of the phase, Maeda lets Danielle know that he needs to give bullets to Aya to help defeat the baby. But Danielle does a Mission Impossible dive out of the chopper and catches on fire and throws the bullets to Aya, and these bullets are the same bullets that Maeda created a day prior that contains Aya's cells. Therefore, we can utilize Maeda's gun we got a while back to finally put it into the baby. This fight is not done because this ultimate being just won't give up. He has now dissolved and is now currently chasing us on the ship. So if we get touched by it, it's practically GG's. So we must run away, but we see the engine room. Therefore, Aya comes up with the idea to blow up the ship, but turning the pressure to blow this popsicle stand. After beating the boss, the game comes back full circle. Aya and the crew goes back to the Carnegie Hall, and it feels like you're playing the game all over again from the very beginning to finally watch the play that Aya originally wanted to go watch. And this time, we notice a couple of things. The audience eyes start glowing this red hint, which looks like it will be a sequel into Parasite 2 that comes into play. Maeda also tries to say his feelings. But Parasite Eve is a wonderful game that received a lot of praise during the time of release, and with it being an experimental phase for Square at the time, it definitely feels good. And to keep that Resident Evil formula, we get a new game plus, which allows us to replay the game with our in-game gear, and we lock a brand new location, which is the Chrysler Building. This overall acts as a tower dungeon crawler, climbing up rooms. If I'm not mistaken, there are 77 floors, and by doing this, we get a secret ending which shows a cocoon, and we now have access to the true final boss, who takes the form of Aya's sister, Maya. She explains to Aya that Clamp cultivated the liver cells of the original Eve to analyze. When Melissa was giving birth to the ultimate being, she created a nest there. In case Melissa and the ultimate being failed, the purebred would remain. So basically having contingency plans behind contingency plans. Aya speaks with her sister for a while, but Eve soon takes over, and we actually end up getting the secret boss fight. After the purebred is defeated, the mitochondria inside Aya's body begin to rebel against her. It is also explained that Aya's mitochondria have now reached a higher evolutionary stage than Maya's, but Maya's personality has become dominant and begun to fight off the Eve persona. Maya eventually wins, purging the Eve persona from herself, and protects Aya by preventing the original Eve from taking over her, spreading like a goddamn virus. Aya ends up leaving the building after telling Maya to return home together, and even after beating it again, I still wish for a remake of this game with today's current technology, with the success horror games like Silent Hill 2 remake and even the Resident Evil remakes. I feel like this game is a great story that has a lot of people that should play it or at least experience it themselves. And hey, maybe with the remake, they can add more to the game, flesh out the story a little bit more, get those emotional bits that really fully flesh it out. Because this game was so big that it needed to have 2 discs just to finish it. And it had a lot of CG videos as well, so that probably filled up the overall disc and all that good stuff. I'm not saying to make it as a big as Final Fantasy VII Remake size, but definitely fleshing out more of those relationships between the characters. Like I said earlier, Maeda feelings towards Aya as we see him trying to confess to her in the final moments of the original ending before getting cock-blocked by both Ben and Daniel at the Opera House. But let me know, what are your favorite moments in the Parasite Eve series? Let me know in the comment section below. But that wraps up my very first retrospective into a series. I had lots of fun working on this project and would love to do more. And if you guys want, I could definitely work on Parasite Eve 2. If you enjoyed my retrospective, if you have any other RPG games that you would like me to do a deep dive in, let me know in the comment section below. And of course, these retrospectives will get better over time the more I do them. But if you enjoyed today's episode, then like the video, subscribe to the channel for more RPGs news, reviews, and as well as guides. And if you want to check out any other reviews, then I'll leave a video here for you. And as always, stay safe out there. And it's been your host, KICTV, here at Chaotic Inc., signing out. Peace.